The Doordash driver started his day like any other, sliding into the worn seat of his compact car and opening the app with a sip of lukewarm coffee in hand. The screen lit up with a new order, nothing unusual, just a burger joint on the edge of town, a 6-minute drive from his current location. The sky overhead was cloudy, but nothing alarming, just a dull gray shroud stretching across the sky, like a ceiling painted in shadows. As he drove through the quiet residential streets, he noticed an eerie stillness outside his windows, trees motionless, birds absent, and the usual hum of traffic strangely muted. Radio alerts interrupted the lo-fi music on his speaker, vaguely mentioning rotational activity in counties miles away. But the driver shrugged it off, focusing instead on beating the estimated delivery time. As he pulled into the restaurant's parking lot, a strong gust of wind slammed his car door shut, causing him to flinch and glance upward, where the clouds now swirled like slow-moving beasts. The cashier handed over the sealed bag with a quick smile, but her eyes darted nervously toward the windows where dust started rising in miniature whirlwinds. The driver tapped picked up order and began navigating toward the customer's location, which turned out to be in a semi-rural area on the outskirts of town, farther than he preferred, but still within range. As he drove out past the last of the stoplights, fences replaced storefronts, and wide-open fields lined with barns and tall grass spread out in every direction. The road twisted slightly uphill, giving him a momentary vantage point where he paused and saw something troubling, a long, low-shelf cloud in the distance, darker than ink and rolling forward like a tide. He kept driving, glancing in his rearview mirror, where the same cloud seemed to chase him slowly, gaining density and menace with each mile. The wind picked up with a sharp whistle, bending roadside signs and making the tall cornfield on his left ripple violently like waves in a stormy sea. Static danced across his phone's screen, and the navigation app briefly froze before recalibrating with a warning. Weather alert, tornado watch in effect. Still thinking he had time, the driver pressed on, trying to reach the drop-off before it became too dangerous, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. Then came the sound, the unmistakable siren, blaring from the town's weather alert system, a long, mournful wail that pierced through his car windows and made his chest tighten. Suddenly, leaves and small debris started flying across the road like they had minds of their own, hitting the windshield with startling force. He turned off the music, rolled up the windows, and turned the AC to max, trying to ignore the pressure in the air, which now felt thick and heavy like an incoming tidal wave. The sky grew darker, as if the sun had been swallowed whole, and the once visible line of trees on the horizon disappeared behind a gray wall that began to pulse with violent energy. He passed a farmhouse where the family was outside ushering animals into a storm cellar, their gestures frantic and voices lost in the rising wind. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he gripped the steering wheel and picked up speed, the heart pounding in rhythm with a now pounding rain that fell in sudden, overwhelming sheets. The visibility dropped to almost nothing, and he leaned forward in his seat as if that would help him see farther through the soaked windshield. Thunder cracked loud enough to make his ears ring, followed immediately by a flash of lightning that illuminated a terrifying glimpse of the sky, a rotating funnel beginning to descend from the low-hanging clouds. Panic clutched his throat as the realization hit him. The tornado wasn't forming. It had already begun. He knew he had only minutes, if not seconds, to decide whether to continue toward the delivery or turn around and look for safety. The idea of food suddenly felt irrelevant, surreal even, compared to the primal fear gripping his chest as the atmosphere around him collapsed into chaos. He scanned the road ahead and spotted a small service station, seemingly deserted, but possibly his best chance at protection. Gravel flew beneath his tires as he veered off the road, hoping the structure could offer more than just a thin roof over his head. Yet even as he pulled in, the wind howled louder than before, and the whole building groaned like it was alive and afraid of what was coming. He stopped the car but didn't get out, eyes locked on the black wedge of fury in the near distance, growing, moving, hunting. The Doordash driver had delivered to all kinds of places in all kinds of conditions, but nothing had prepared him for this. He wasn't just delivering food now, he was racing the sky for his life. With nowhere safe confirmed and his phone glitching out completely, he had to decide fast. Stay and risk the building collapsing, or drive again and gamble on finding real shelter. The wind screamed again, and something massive, maybe a road sign, blew past his windshield and vanished into the sky like a leaf caught in fire. As the car rocked under the force of the wind, the driver felt the first true spike of fear shoot down his spine and realized that nature had officially taken over the route now. The bag of food sat silently on the passenger seat, the grease starting to soak through the brown paper, forgotten in the chaos, And that's when the driver's mind shifted from delivery to pure survival. He opened his glove box, grabbed the flashlight, and began scanning the surrounding area through the rain-splattered glass, desperately looking for something, anything that could protect him from what was coming. The wind outside intensified so quickly it felt unnatural, like the world was skipping past its normal transitions and jumping straight into catastrophe. The Doordash driver's hands trembled slightly as he turned the ignition off, then quickly back on again, realizing sitting in a parked car beneath power lines wasn't just foolish, it was suicidal. He reversed hastily, tires squealing against the wet pavement as he turned back onto the main road, which was now barely visible through the thick wall of rain and flying debris. The phone on his dash flickered, and when it briefly worked, it no longer displayed directions. It just showed a spinning loading wheel and a bright red bar at the top warning of severe weather. The sky ahead pulsed with a sickly green hue, a telltale sign of a tornado brewing directly within the storm's belly. Then, without any cinematic buildup, the funnel touched down in the far distance, a slim, dark spiral reaching from the heavens to the trembling earth, widening as it moved with terrifying elegance. The driver let out an involuntary gasp, foot pressing harder on the gas pedal, no longer thinking about traffic laws or GPS instructions, just survival. Fences were down, and power lines sagged low across parts of the road, forcing him to swerve between mailboxes, garbage bins, and pieces of someone's shattered barn. A gust slammed into the side of his car like a truck, nearly tipping him sideways and forcing the vehicle into the opposite lane, tires skidding dangerously over wet pavement. He screamed, not words, just raw sound, and kept going, blood pounding in his ears as another crash of thunder shook the entire landscape. Up ahead, a sign pointed toward an elementary school he vaguely remembered passing before, and in a flash of clarity, he recalled they had a storm shelter beneath the gymnasium. He turned hard onto the road leading there, windshield wipers now useless against the torrential downpour as water and wind tore across the landscape like invisible claws. Trees bent nearly in half, and one finally gave in, crashing down behind him with a sickening crunch, blocking the road he'd just come from. The tornado had changed direction, veering slightly, but was moving faster than anticipated, cutting diagonally across the road and field in front of him, sucking up hay bales and entire pieces of fence. His foot slammed the brake as the swirling mass moved across the open space to his right, and he watched in stunned horror as the roof of a distant barn peeled off and vanished into the vortex like a napkin in a vacuum. Panic made him try to drive again, but the car fishtailed as it hydroplaned over pooling water, nearly slamming into a roadside ditch before he corrected just in time. A smaller funnel, like a child born of the larger one, formed off to the left and briefly touched down, snapping a billboard in half before lifting again like a predator sampling prey. Sirens howled again, this time overlapping with emergency vehicle horns somewhere far away. But they were distant, overwhelmed by the howl of the wind and roar of destruction nearby. The school building finally came into view, its brick walls looking like salvation, but the parking lot was empty, and a large tree had been ripped up and lay across the front entrance. He drove around back, heart pounding as he found a side door near the gym still intact, and threw the car into park before rushing outside. The moment he opened the door, the storm nearly ripped it from his hands, and the paper bag on the passenger seat was instantly soaked, the food order now a distant memory. He clutched the flashlight in one hand and his phone in the other as he bolted across the pavement, rain blinding him and wind buffeting him from all directions. Reaching the side entrance, he tried the door. It was locked. He slammed his fist against it, once, twice, praying someone might be inside, but the building offered no response, just silence and creaking noises from the roof above. Realizing he couldn't waste more time, he turned away and scanned the area again, this time noticing a sloped cellar door behind the building near a chain-link fence, a storm shelter slightly ajar. He sprinted toward it, slipping on wet mud and cutting his palm on gravel, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. The door creaked open, and he dove inside, landing hard on a damp cement floor, coughing and soaked to the bone. As he pulled the shelter door closed behind him, the sound of the tornado outside reached a new, horrifying volume, like a freight train screaming just overhead. Inside, the space was dark but not completely. Emergency lights flickered faintly along the walls, revealing dusty shelves and overturned chairs, but more importantly, thick concrete walls all around him. He braced himself in a corner, chest heaving as the shelter vibrated with the force of the monster outside. Debris slammed against the exterior, wood, metal, maybe even parts of vehicles, all of it sounding like the end of the world. The pressure changed, his ears popping violently, and for a brief moment it felt like gravity itself twisted sideways. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the shelter into near-total darkness save for his shaky flashlight beam. His phone buzzed with a notification, "Tornado warning, seek shelter immediately." He almost laughed. It was a little late for that. Time felt warped as he waited, every second dragging like an hour, until finally the roar began to fade, replaced by the distant whimper of wind and scattered sirens in the far distance. The tornado had passed, but the world above was likely unrecognizable. The Doordash driver remained frozen in place, unsure if it was truly over, drenched, shivering, and completely alone in a shelter meant for dozens. He'd made it through the first part, but the storm wasn't done with him yet. The Doordash driver waited in the shelter longer than he intended, unsure how much time had passed while he sat in darkness, listening for any signs that the storm might return. The air was thick with the scent of damp cement and mildew, and his breath fogged in the beam of his flashlight as he tried to steady his racing mind. When the wind above finally quieted and the silence grew more consistent than alarming, he decided to emerge, opening the metal doors cautiously, half expecting to find chaos waiting to pounce. What greeted him was worse than he imagined. Trees uprooted like weeds, cars overturned, fences gone, and splinters of buildings scattered like confetti across the landscape. The sky had cleared slightly, revealing a moody post-storm light filtering through the remnants of cloud cover, and the ground shimmered with puddles and glass and ruin. He trudged back toward his car, which, by some miracle, was still upright and only slightly damaged. Scratched sides, a cracked mirror, and debris piled around the tires. He had to kick broken limbs and trash away just to open the driver's side door and squeeze himself inside, soaking the seat and leaving muddy streaks on the upholstery. Turning the ignition caused the engine to sputter, hesitate, then roar to life, coughing like it had just survived trauma. He exhaled in relief, gripping the wheel again as if it were a lifeline, and reversed slowly out of the wreckage. He didn't even think about the food order anymore. It was either destroyed or inedible, but his mind still obsessed over one goal: get out of the damage zone before another storm hit. As he drove cautiously through the debris-littered street, he encountered his first major obstacle: power lines tangled across the road, sparking slightly in the puddles below. He stopped several yards back and scanned the sides of the street, spotting a narrow dirt driveway that curved around a grove of trees and appeared to reconnect with a side road. Without hesitating, he turned onto it, tires slipping and mud spraying as he maneuvered around fallen branches and fences. The route worked for a while, but then the path narrowed, and the car's tires sank deeply into mud softened by relentless rain, grinding to a halt. He slammed the gear into reverse, but the wheels spun helplessly, kicking up muck without moving an inch. Cursing under his breath, he opened the door and stepped into ankle-deep sludge, his shoes instantly soaked and heavy. Surveying the situation, he realized the back tires were nearly buried, and if he didn't act fast, the vehicle might be fully stuck. He grabbed a pair of cheap floor mats from under the front seats, shoved them behind the rear tires, and tried again. The engine roared, the wheels spun, and then finally, the car lurched forward a few feet before catching traction. He didn't stop. He floored it just enough to escape the soft earth and return to gravel, heart pounding from the close call. As he rejoined the road, another problem loomed. A collapsed overpass up ahead blocked the main exit route out of town, and concrete rubble spilled across the highway like the bones of a broken giant. He veered off onto another road, relying purely on memory now since his phone had lost all signal and showed nothing but an SOS bar and a frozen screen. He passed crushed cars, destroyed gas stations, and entire roofs lodged in ditches like metal sleds, the destruction everywhere and all-consuming. Then he saw movement up ahead, figures, maybe survivors, waving frantically near a pickup truck that had flipped into a ditch. For a split second, he slowed down, torn between helping and fleeing, but then he remembered how alone he'd felt in that shelter, and how lucky he was to even be alive. He pulled over, rolled down his window, and yelled to them over the distance. One of them, a man covered in mud and blood, called back that they were okay, but stranded, unable to climb out of the ditch with their injured friend. Without hesitating, the Doordash driver parked and climbed down into the muddy embankment, helping them lift the injured person, an elderly woman, up the slope. Together, with the help of one uninjured teen, they carried her to the road and flagged down another passing car that stopped and agreed to take her to the nearest hospital. Thanked but still drenched and exhausted, the driver returned to his own car, his hands shaking not from fear anymore, but from adrenaline and disbelief. Every choice now felt like a test, every detour a gamble. He continued driving, looking for clearer roads or signs of emergency crews, and eventually came across an old service road leading to the outskirts of town. It was partially blocked by a downed tree, but just narrow enough that his small car might squeeze past if he folded the mirror in. He took the chance, inching through slowly, the tree branches scraping against the side like fingernails against metal. Finally, the road opened up to a less affected area. Some houses still standing, power flickering in streetlights, a fire truck in the distance. The worst appeared to be behind him, but he knew it wasn't over. The Doordash driver had no destination anymore. His app was useless, his route destroyed, his cargo forgotten. But survival was now his only objective. And even though he was out of the storm's core, the disaster's aftershock had left the world cracked open, unfamiliar and hostile. Each minute felt like a miracle, but he knew more decisions were ahead. Shelter, safety, communication, maybe even returning to check on those still trapped or hurt. And despite everything, he still clutched his phone like it could magically spring back to life and tell him what to do next. He drove forward into the unknown, road by road, adapting and surviving one broken street at a time. The sky had begun to take on an odd post-storm hue, faint orange peeking through smeared clouds, but the Doordash driver knew better than to assume it was over. Tornado systems often traveled in waves, and the eerie calm could just be the eye between destruction. His car, now scratched, dented, and clinging to life, shuddered each time he accelerated, but it moved, and that was all that mattered. He passed what remained of a gas station, where pumps had been ripped from the ground and scattered like toys across a flooded parking lot. As he approached a stretch of low-lying land near the town's edge, a new alert appeared on his flickering phone screen. Second tornado touchdown confirmed. Seek shelter immediately. That message sent a bolt of fear through his already frayed nerves, and he scanned the surroundings for anything, any structure that wasn't glass or wood or already broken. That's when he spotted a concrete slab half buried in weeds, partially hidden behind an old signpost bent from the storm's wrath. He pulled over and sprinted toward it, wind picking up again, the whistling sound returning like a warning. He yanked open the rusted metal hatch and found a narrow staircase leading into a shelter that smelled like dust, wet stone, and time. The shelter had been used before. It had storage bins along the wall, cracked plastic chairs, and even a folded emergency cot, but everything looked abandoned, like whoever stocked it had forgotten to come back. He dropped his soaked backpack and flashlight onto a bench and slumped down, letting his body finally release some of the tension that had gripped him since the first sight of the tornado. The thick concrete around him muffled the outside world, and for a brief moment, it felt like the storm had been left behind entirely. But his rest was short-lived. A noise, faint at first, rose above the stillness. It wasn't the wind, or thunder, or falling debris. It was screaming. A voice, distant, but unmistakable. Someone was calling for help. He bolted upright, heart racing again, unsure if the sound was real or just another illusion of his exhausted mind. But then he heard it again, high-pitched, panicked cry echoing across the open field above. He climbed the stairs halfway, carefully cracked the hatch, and looked out. The second tornado hadn't landed yet, but the sky was angry, swirling in anticipation, and the wind pulled at him like fingers trying to drag him into the air. Across the field, stumbling near a barbed wire fence, was a figure, small, alone, clearly disoriented. The voice, now desperate and clearer, cried out for help again. The Doordash driver hesitated. This shelter might be the only solid protection for Miles. If he left it, he risked being caught in the full brunt of the next tornado. But if he stayed, someone would likely die. He gritted his teeth, shoved the hatch fully open, and charged back into the chaos, the storm welcoming him with a blast of wind and sharp rain. He slipped in the mud, caught his balance, and sprinted toward the figure, who turned out to be a young girl, maybe early teens, with a gash on her forehead and wide, terrified eyes. She shouted something incoherent over the wind, but he didn't stop to ask questions. He grabbed her arm and motioned to follow him, and together they half ran, half tripped back toward the shelter. The wind roared louder now, louder than before, and the pressure dropped so rapidly that both of their ears popped painfully. Debris began to fly again, small pieces at first, then large, chunks of siding, glass, even a splintered mailbox. They reached the hatch just as a gust nearly knocked them both to the ground. The driver shoved the door open again, practically threw the girl inside, then followed and slammed it shut behind them. The sound outside became monstrous. The tornado had touched down somewhere nearby, and the ground above rumbled like a freight train was barreling directly overhead. Inside the shelter, the girl was shaking and crying, clutching her scraped knees and rocking slightly, but she was safe. He handed her the last remaining emergency blanket from the corner and sat beside her, placing his flashlight upright so it cast a soft, steady glow on the damp walls. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Words felt too small for what they were enduring. The entire structure groaned under the strain of the wind, but it held. Minutes dragged by, then more, until finally the sound began to fade again. First the wind, then the rain, then silence. When he finally cracked the hatch again, the storm had passed. What remained outside was unrecognizable: flattened fields, stripped trees, and distant rooftops that no longer belonged to anything. The driver climbed out first, helping the girl follow, both of them squinting at the sunlight trying to break through the clouds. The girl didn't speak much, just nodded, holding the blanket tightly around her shoulders. He looked out at the wreckage, knowing the storm might return again later, but for now, they had survived. He had saved a life, and somehow in all of it, he hadn't lost his own. In the days following the tornado, the city was draped in a quiet unfamiliar to its normally vibrant rhythm, the kind of silence that lingers after something unthinkable has passed. Rescue teams worked tirelessly through the wreckage, navigating fallen buildings, smoke-stained intersections, and whole neighborhoods reduced to piles of memories and debris. Streets that once buzzed with life had become temporary shelters, triage zones, and landing pads for emergency helicopters ferrying the injured to overwhelmed hospitals. The mother, now recovering in a downtown medical center alongside her baby, found herself surrounded by nurses and first responders eager to hear her story, a story that began not with the tornado sirens, but with a man who had no name, no address, and no reason to help, yet had done so without hesitation. She described him as best she could: the layers of dirt on his clothes, the scar down his forearm, the calm intensity in his eyes, and the way he had always placed himself between her and danger without ever asking for thanks. The media latched onto the account immediately, spinning it into headlines like "Mystery Man Saves Mother and Infant in Tornado Chaos" and "Guardian Angel in Rags Vanishes After Heroic Rescue." Photos of the wreckage circulated across television and social media, but no one could find the man she spoke of, not in shelters, not in aid lines, not even in the hospitals where hundreds of injured were being treated. The mother, despite her injuries and exhaustion, refused to stop searching. She described him to every firefighter, every medic, every volunteer who walked through the door, hoping one of them might know who he was. Meanwhile, the homeless man kept to the outskirts of the ruined city, returning to the alleys and underpasses that had once served as his makeshift home, now littered with twisted metal and glass. He watched the city rebuild from the shadows, limping past construction crews and quietly helping where he could, pulling a broken fence off a trapped dog, leading a group of lost evacuees to a shelter, or handing out scavenged bottled water to families waiting in food lines. He avoided crowds, turned down offered food if others needed it more, and kept his face away from cameras, not out of shame, but out of habit. He wasn't used to being seen and didn't want to start now. But whispers began to follow him. People who saw him lifting debris outside a collapsed church, who noticed him covering sleeping children with tarps at night, who caught a glimpse of him limping through rain with a first aid kit slung over his shoulder. Volunteers started calling him the ghost in the coat, a quiet presence who never asked for help but always gave it. Eventually, one of the shelter workers matched the mother's story to the man and tried to stop him on the street, but he disappeared down an alley before she could even say thank you. When she told the mother what she saw, the woman's heart leapt with renewed determination. She gathered her baby, wrapped tightly in a donated blanket, and walked block after block with a photo drawn by a police sketch artist, showing it to anyone who'd listen. Her journey took her through church kitchens, gymnasiums turned shelters, and food distribution lines, where she described how he spoke, how he moved, and how he'd saved their lives without ever asking why. Days passed. Then a week. Then, one rainy evening, as she sat beneath the overhang near the same city park where she had first seen him, now filled with FEMA tents and broken trees, he appeared across the lot, dragging a broken trash can away from a flooded storm drain to keep it from overflowing. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world quieted again, as it had in the shelter. She stood, slowly walked across the gravel path, and approached him with tears welling up, not of fear or sadness, but of gratitude too large to carry alone. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She only wrapped her arms around him gently, the baby between them, and let the silence carry everything that words could not. The homeless man stiffened for a second, unsure, then placed a hand on the baby's back and nodded once, his eyes closing for just a breath. It wasn't about recognition. It was about knowing he mattered, even if only for a moment. Later that week, the city released a public message thanking all unnamed heroes, And though many names were listed, one line stood out at the bottom. To the man with no name who carried 2 lives through the storm, you are not forgotten. Donations poured in to help the mother and child, but many insisted on helping the man as well, even though he could not be found again. A plaque was placed in the municipal shelter, etched with a single quote, "Even those with nothing can give everything." In time, the city healed, buildings were rebuilt, streets were cleaned, and the story of the homeless man became a kind of local legend, told in classrooms, shared in sermons, and remembered in moments of kindness. The mother and her baby would walk past that plaque every year on the storm's anniversary, laying flowers in silence. And though they never saw him again, somewhere in the city's veins, under bridges or inside shelters, he walked on, watching, helping, disappearing before the world could catch up. Because sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who don't need to be seen. They just need to know that someone, somewhere, is safe because they were there.